this series I paint Space Marines, which are determined by spinning two wheels. One picks the colour scheme and the other the artistic style or limitation. This time, an Iron Hand. Never painted one of those before, and the style I'm going to be painting that Iron Hand in is... okay. Of all the artistic styles, this was the one I think I dreaded the most because, well, I'm glad it was an Iron Hand. Like, that takes care of a large problem. The armor's gonna be black. But in my opinion, miniature painting is all about contrast. Maximizing contrast in value, hue, saturation, textures, all with the goal of making a small model readable as a large thing. So I had a really significant choice in picking the third colour, and I chose to go with Talassar Blue. The reason that I went with Talassar Blue is it was the most saturated, vibrant blue that I owned. And with the goal of maximizing contrast, I wanted to have the most saturated blue I could possibly start with. I could then dilute it, but I could go up to a really quite blue in the paint scheme. I painted up the intercessor and base coated him black, and I knew that I wanted to do the armor in a very specific way. There's this famous Al Pacino artwork of Space Marines, I think they're Dark Angels, where they have very black armor, but really well-defined glossy highlights, and I wanted to try and do the same thing with this armor. So there was a very clear texture to the armor sections. So the way that I did that was, as with all kinds of realistic lighting effects, I picked where my light was coming from. I actually picked 4 different directions and took pictures of the light source's POV, and then started placing grey highlights, so monochrome grey, no blue in it whatsoever, and worked up to making that brighter and brighter and stippling on smaller and smaller areas of highlights from the perspective of the 4 different light sources. Now the idea here is no matter which angle you look at the model from, you're always going to see at least 1 highlight, but hopefully not 2 in a confusing way. I don't think it quite worked. The metals were where this model really became a time sink, because I decided that I wanted to maximize that contrast of the sort of glossy highlights of the black armor and the metal by making that metal chrome, and specifically doing sky and earth non-metallic metals, so you have a reflection of the blue sky above, a crisp horizon line, and then a dark landscape, which you'd normally have as a contrasting color, like, you know, green, but it was grey. So for each part of the model that was chrome, I set a horizon line and then glazed up from white near the horizon to a grey closer to sort of the zenith, and then glazed in blue. So it was less saturated towards the horizon and more saturated towards the zenith. And in a few cases where I felt like you would actually see it, I then put the light source of the sun. And then below the horizon line glazed down so that it was whiter towards the bottom and grey towards the horizon, with the idea being you have that maximum contrast. That's what makes something look chrome, is that maximum contrast at the horizon line. This varies in effectiveness across the whole model. I'm pretty happy with it on the backpack, I must say, and the bolt gun looks pretty good. The Aquila was an absolute nightmare. That chest Aquila, the feathers are just too small for me to be able to put, effectively you need like 5 layers for this technique to work and to register as chrome. And the feathers are just so thin that with my skill and my equipment, I was not able to accomplish that. So I decided that they'd all be looking upwards, and it kind of comes across as just a bit more glossy than chrome, but yeah, works well enough. With that done, there were just 3 more things to do. Firstly, I knew that I wanted an extra texture in there, so I wanted to make the eyes glow. Well, the eyes are one of the things on the forearm, so went in with my airbrush. This was the first time I'd used the Harder and Steenbeck 0.45 needle, which I feel like I'm finally getting the hang of airbrushing, maybe? My wife will laugh at me saying that because I'm always so frustrated with the thing. But airbrushed in some white to get the glow, and then airbrushed in some Talassar Blue neat through the airbrush to get the blue glow, and then reaffirmed the fact that it was actually glowing by just a highlight of pure white in the crevices, you know, where the light source would meet the non-glowing parts of the model. And I think that worked well. We've got extra contrast in there. Secondly was another new texture. I put a set of leather pouches on there as a challenge to myself. So I did those in pure monochrome grey because I wanted to keep the blues just for the metallics and for the glow. And it looks a little strange, but I think it does read as desaturated leather. It's, you know, some imaginary cow where I guess there's just no pigment. Albino cows, maybe? And with that done, I could then move on to the base, which I wanted to keep with the 3 colors rule. So I decided, given also that the reflection of the chrome was kind of gray, that we could maybe be on a snow planet. And so I airbrushed in some grays onto the black base to then go over with the Telesar blue through the airbrush, so it sort of looked like a lake surface, but a melting lake surface. So I layered on some snow flock mixed with PVA and white paint. Not very happy with this. I just don't think the product was particularly good or like fine enough for this to work. It's okay, but the base is not the part of the model that I'm particularly interested in. Probably a weakness of me as a painter, so I was just happy to leave this being kind of mid. But with that, this exercise in trying to eke as much value out of 3 paints as possible in saturation, in texture, and in brightness was done. And it's not my favourite model in this series, but I'm pretty happy with it. I think it works, and I think it showcases why you don't just use 3 paints. Like, you really do need an extra colour in there, I think, to maximise the contrast available to you. It's fine, but it would have been better if I could have used, say, a green to make the chrome pop, for example, or something to add a bit of variety to the shadows of the armour. Maybe I could have started as a mid to dark grey and gone down to, I don't know, maybe a purple in the shadows. But as with every model in this series, I do think I've taken something away from this. It's really, I think, made me think critically about how I'm getting value out of paints, and specifically thinking about different textures on a model. And in that sense, I think it's an absolute triumph. I back myself, and I've really got a lot of value out of 3 paints, and I set out what I wanted to achieve. I don't think I'm going to do this again though, with just 3 paints. There was so much back and forth, especially with the chrome. My god, this was such a fiddly model to work with. So yeah, might not do this one again. But with that, that's the 8th model in this random Astartes series finished, and the next spin of the wheel is actually going to determine what the final 2 models of this series are going to look like. So the penultimate model in this series is going to be... a Space Wolf! Nice to not have to do 2 mostly black models back to back. And the style that Space Wolf is going to be painted in is going to be... right. Okay, I've got a plan.